How y'all doing? Good? Thank you all for being here.
Of course.
Also, thank you all for telling the story about this. This is, I believe that holding the tech industry accountable to diversity and inclusion and really holding accountable and also telling the stories that need to be told, both positive and what's not working and what is working, I think is really important. So I'm really glad to have you all here and to have you doing this important work. So let's start with brief introductions, who you are, what you do, and also why you do it.
Yeah, I guess I'm closest to you, so I'll begin. I'm Megan Rose Dickey. I'm a reporter at TechCrunch. I cover issues of diversity and inclusion in the tech industry. I'll also touch on the gig economy and all of the companies that are kind of part of that beat. Why I do what I do? I mean, I definitely have some selfish reasons for it. I identify as a woman, a queer woman of color, so a lot of these things affect me. But of course, it's diversity and inclusion is not just around that. It's about physical ability, mental ability, sight, all of that. And I just think it's important that the industry is very inclusive for everyone and that I hold them accountable to it.
Awesome. Sal?
So I'm Salvador Rodriguez. I'm tech correspondent with Reuters. I primarily cover enterprise technology, but before I started this job, covering tech diversity was a big part of what I did, and the editors at Reuters also care heavily about this subject, so we've been able to continue covering it. And for me, I care about this topic because it's a big storyline that has been the case in this industry for a few years now. But more so because I grew up in Houston, Texas, which you may or may not know is actually a very diverse city. To the point where when I first moved to San Francisco and started covering this, my parents were all from Mexico. They were like, "Why are you covering diversity? What's racism? Like, we don't know what this is." Because they had just never experienced it in Houston, and so it's to me it's pretty interesting, how that differs from one geography to the next.
Wow.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rita Kallas, and I'm with DiversityCom. We have 6 resource magazines that focus on D&I, including women and minorities within technology in the various spaces in workforce and business. I manage our partnerships, so I work with a lot of organizations like Change Catalyst to help get that message out there and to make sure that the nation understands and knows what is happening in the world of D&I, specific to each organization and partner. Why do I do this? Because I love people, and I'm looking at the audience right now, and you guys represent everything that we're trying to do, everyone that we're trying to include, and everyone that we're trying to help them narrate their own stories so that the world is more diverse and inclusive. Being a Middle Eastern female in America, I've been really blessed that I haven't experienced any kind of racism or bias and prejudice, but I have seen it. And anything that I can do to contribute to making it a more inclusive culture is something that I'm going to chase until the end of time.
Awesome. How has this story evolved since you all first started telling it? How has the story of diversity and inclusion in tech evolved? What was it when you first started? Where is it now?
I'll start. So about 5 years ago, the story was more like, technology. It is, the next frontier, so to speak. And growing up, you realize that we're moving towards that world, that age. In the 5 years that I've been doing what I do, we've seen the conversation go from, we should be including everybody in technology, and we should include everybody in STEM. And now let's move it to going into the schools and reaching the kids at a very younger age, right? Really educating them that science and STEM is something so cool that they can do. And then it became, well, let's include more women. And then it became, let's include all of the different diversity aspects in terms of LGBT, minorities, veterans in tech. And now the conversation for us as the epicenter of news and information on D&I is now that we've included everybody, how do we keep them included, and how do we take that to the next level? How do we educate the next generation to know and understand that this is norm? that what you see up here, this diversity, is in fact the norm, and it should be inclusive in every company culture.
And just to clarify, when you say now that we've included everybody, you mean in the stories that you're telling?
In the
right?
story,
Okay.
yeah. In the,
So we can have it all
let me
figured
be
out in
clear.
there.
Let me be clear. Yeah, in the stories that we're telling, because I know that the media tends to focus on what's not happening, right? But we like to tell the story of what is happening. We like to showcase the female in tech who found an amazing opportunity, the entrepreneur who is now LGBT certified that is going out and working with Fortune 500 companies. The stories that we tell, where we are seeing that inclusion. But there are still milestones ahead in order for us to accomplish really including everybody in everyone's story that they see in here.
Yeah, and I think just in addition to that, we've seen tech companies go from just releasing their diversity reports, they're terrible, and like that's it, to going to, okay, well, let's focus on inclusion. How can we make people feel welcome in these companies? So they started talking about unconscious bias training and things like that, and that has since evolved to, like, Square, for example, they've been doing this ally training. And then, gosh, what was it that Lyft told me they were doing? Conscious action training. And that was something that I had never heard of, but sounds awesome.
Makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like, so you've done the unconscious bias training. You realize that you have unconscious biases, everyone does, but then it's like, okay, now that you are in acceptance around that, how can you actually go about, like being an ally and taking action around some of those biases? So I think, it's definitely moving in the right direction, but, it's never fast enough.
Yeah.
For me, I've seen it evolve from, I was among the folks that were covering it when Google first put out their diversity report, which in my head is kind of like the beginning of the current diversity movement that we're in, although I understand that there are many folks who have been working on this for a long time before that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like when I jumped on the ship. And it's kind of funny because at that time I wrote it and I thought I had a good story. And I had a white editor who came in and chopped it up and taught me how to cover diversity. So that was interesting.
Was it helpful?
Oh, no. He was my least favorite editor that I've ever worked with. But anyways,
Let's name and shame. Who was it?
well, they still work in the tech industry, so you can decipher from my resume.
Okay.
But anyways,
But that's an interesting component of all of this, right? Is you all work with editors too, and there's
some
arguably
folks
a
who
lack
get
of-
it and some folks who don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so it went from diversity reports, and that was the big theme 2014, which is in and of itself a big victory, right? And then 2015 came around, and it was like, oh my God, these diversity reports. It was
It's the same.
yeah, this is not going to solve
Yeah.
itself. Oh my, who would have thought,
Yeah.
And then from 2015 to 2016, it was more actual firm, steps that were being taken. You could see, you really started to decipher who was taking it seriously and who was just trying to not get left behind, right?
Yeah.
And then the theme as we went into 2017 was this fear of oh my God, what's going to happen to the diversity movement, following these changes in politics, right? But I think that if anything, the movement seems like it's going as strong as ever. But what has been the theme, at least in my coverage, and I equate it a lot to when folks at these companies get advice hey, you should take diversity seriously, it kind of is very reminiscent to me of when people are told to take cybersecurity seriously. And it's kind of hey, you should buy insurance.
No, really, you need
Right.
to, right?
Yeah, and then they're yeah, okay, dude. And then Uber happens, and it's oh my God, why did I not invest in diversity? And so we've been seeing that left and right, at the smallest startup levels, Upload VR and SoFi and whatnot, to the very prominent Uber, and even after the James Damore incident at Google, I mean, whether Google was doing a good job or not, they ended up losing a whole week of work, right? Because who at Google wasn't distracted by that?
Yeah.
So so I think we've really started in 2017 to see the ramifications of not taking diversity seriously.
You brought up naming and shaming, and that's
I was
something
kind
that-
of joking,
I know
but
you
also
were.
being somewhat serious.
I know,
Go on, though.
but that's definitely something that's come up over the last day and a half here is how much should we be shaming, how much should we be naming, and versus how much should we be celebrating the good stories. What do you all think about that?
Well, you took a swipe at mainstream media, right, saying that we don't like celebrate, like individuals. It all depends, right, on your publication, right? At Reuters, we don't really do like a feature of anyone. But I think, if there's any other journalists out there who are watching, like one way you can celebrate it is like you don't go to your diverse source on just diversity stuff. Like you could ask them about their expertise in whatever technology they do, right? So,
Right.
I mean, I honestly, like when I was first getting into diversity coverage, I pitched it to my editors as I told them like, hey, this is a good way to just source up on, tech. And they're like, oh yeah, no, you're right. And so, yeah, I mean, I try to get like a diversity of sources in the stories that I write.
So you sort of, like in tech companies, you have to make the case for diversity and inclusion, you have to your editors as well?
I think in the earliest of days, in terms of like, let me allocate way more time to this. But now at Reuters, it's pretty obvious. Like at Reuters, they approach it the same way that they approach like sustainability and the environment, where our readers are a lot of folks who are coming to us to like determine like, hey, what markets do I invest in? What companies do I invest in? And one of the factors they care about is like, does this company, what's their stance on social issues? Because that might be a make or break for that reader.
Yeah, and I get that with all of the negative stories of diversity, it can be like it's not very encouraging to other underrepresented people in tech because like they see these stories like sexual harassment, racism, just all of that, and it's just like, well, why would I want to get into that industry? And I mean, it's not that I am looking only for negative stories to tell, but I think that they're important to tell in order to hold these companies accountable. Like, I'm not, just because a company doesn't have harassment or racism, like, that's just how it should be. Like, they don't, I mean, I'm not going to congratulate you for doing what you're supposed to do. So, I mean, so in terms of like writing that story, it's like, oh, look, like, oh my God, this company's not
Right.
super messed up. And
They're complying.
yeah,
great.
it's
Right.
like, that's
At that
not,
level.
that shouldn't
Yeah.
be news. And
Yeah.
in terms of like our job is to report the news and to hold these companies accountable, and that's just kind of how it plays out. But I mean, like that said, like I'm always down to write a feature on a smart startup founder, like no matter like what their race or gender or ability or veteran status, anything, like definitely down to write that story because that's what we do at TechCrunch. But yeah, it just so happens that a lot of these stories are negative. So.
We have a lot of
I
work
think
to do.
I think you
Yeah.
summed it up totally well. I think the ones where you celebrate it is like if a minority or like a woman, like if they raised a ton of money or they're stealing contracts from Microsoft or something, like you just writing that news on its own would be the celebration of it, right?
Yeah.
It's great that my panelists have that platform, right? Because we should be holding these companies and corporations accountable. But at the end of the day, too, we have then news sources like Diversity Comms Publications where we want to celebrate the success stories, where we have colleagues in the industry and in the space, naming and shaming, as you put it. But I think it's important and crucial to bring to light the stories that scare us the most, whether it's focusing on a company that isn't as diverse and inclusive as they should be, doing what they should be doing, not necessarily being praised for, doing the compliance. But also, when you shed the light on those stories, they help others who are in the dark come out. They feel like they have a community to belong to. Once they have that sense of belonging, then we can really have the platform to talk about the good stuff that's happening, to talk about the women who are going into companies and finding success, to talk about that smart startup CEO that's taking it above and beyond what the standard should be. For us, we like to celebrate the diversity and inclusion aspect of it. That's also to say that when a company who is suffering from their D&I report that comes to us and says, hey, we want to put an ad in, and show that we're supportive of all things D&I, we take into account and consideration what that company is actually doing in this space. How many conferences are they attending and supporting and sponsoring and then retaining those minorities from those conferences and events? What kind of platforms do they have in their ERG groups to help their culture, their company culture, really thrive and be that diverse and inclusive? So for us, we're going to continue telling that celebratory story, but in the same breath, we do understand and know that it took a lot of struggles and failures in order to reach that success, and will continue, but we want to keep striving to show that and showcase that success in those stories.
Awesome. Yeah. When Rita, I think you emailed us a couple years ago, and I was impressed with how DiversityCom has like a whole portfolio of magazines with different diversity topics, from diversability to Latinas to diversity in STEM?
In STEAM.
STEAM, yeah. Kind of across the board. And I'm wondering for the two of you, most of the press right now is focused on women in tech, which is a really important component of all of this. But I do wonder, and I want to know what you think about when we're going to get to talking about racism and to talking about ableism and to talking about some of these other issues. There's a lot of LGBT issues as well. When are we going to get beyond just women? I mean,
Yeah.
50% of the population, but even within women, we have all intersectional women, and we're not talking so much about that yet.
Yeah, I mean, well, earlier this morning, I did actually publish a story about women of color. I have done work around ableism and people with disabilities. But I think in terms of like the mainstream as a whole, though, I think there's been like, as both of you were saying earlier, just like it kind of started with like the women issue or whatever, which was mostly white women. And I think even just in these last few months, because there have been so many issues of sexual harassment toward women, I believe like heterosexual women. So like the attention has kind of gone back to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely needing to broaden again and recognize that white women are not the only people who suffer.
Yeah.
So.
And Sal, I saw you just wrote an article about dreamers, and
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that too? And
Yeah. Well, I think so. I wrote an article that basically said the Trump administration's anti-immigration policies are already starting to benefit other countries, and Mexico is particularly unique because so many of the DACA recipients, otherwise known as dreamers, are of Mexican origin, and so some companies like Amazon have already set up facilities down there, and they are fully able and willing to hire up our dreamers if we don't decide to keep them. But going back to when will race become a bigger discussion topic in the mainstream? Because yeah, I mean, all of us here have written about racism and whatnot in the industry, right? I was on the phone with a source a few months back who was he called me and he was like, hey, like Susan Fowler, like that was great, but like what about me? Like what about like Hispanics and whatnot? Like when is that going to be the discussion? And I think that from my perspective, the biggest holdup is that I haven't really seen like a tell-all from like a black person or Hispanic person where they say like this is how someone violated me in some way that's equivalent to like sexual harassment, and it was based on race. Like I haven't seen someone really speak up and put their name to that, which is never easy. And like whenever I talk with my sources and I tell them like they're considering being a whistleblower, like I've spoken with folks and then they do become whistleblowers, and I mean most of the time your life does change, but when that happens, it always like the conversation just goes forward leaps and bounds.
yeah.
But the other question that I have is I'm not entirely sure what the race equivalent of sexual harassment is. other than like someone saying like this high up executive at this company specifically called me the N-word or something.
Right.
You know?
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, you had the Leslie Miley
Yeah,
stuff.
I was just gonna
and
say
Right,
Leslie
right.
Miley versus Susan
And
Fowler,
then
maybe.
there was
Yeah.
also, I'm unfortunately blanking on her name, but she worked at Squarespace, and I think it was like this Medium post. Well, Amelie Lamont, thank you for that. Yeah, and like her Medium post was like not a black chair, and some exec like made some comment that she just, I think it was like that she like blended in to the black chair, like they couldn't see her.
Jeez.
So I mean, these things definitely happen, but because our society is just so incredibly racist, those stories don't. People are not in as much outrage. It's just
Right.
like, oh my God, this poor white lady. Oh my God, like we have to, go to bat for her. But for a black woman, it's like, okay.
Although, like, in the tech industry, though, especially when it was the VCs, like, a lot of the women that spoke up were women of color. So,
Yeah. Sarah Coons.
I don't know if it's
Yeah.
just easier to understand the concept of sexual harassment than it is to understand just, blatant racism or...
Yeah.
I just don't know what it would take for people to get in the outrage that they are right now when it
Yeah.
comes to gender, yeah.
Right, because
Interesting.
it unfortunately didn't happen with Amelie. It didn't really happen with Leslie. There was
Right.
like a little bit, but still like
Right, like
the
you hear the
level of
the
outrage.
microaggressions, right?
Right.
But we haven't seen a macroaggression yet, I guess.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder, in the hiring process eventually, I wonder if anything will come out from that. So you mentioned this earlier, Sal. Toward the beginning of the year, we were all kind of wondering if the diversity conversation was going to kind of leave the limelight, and clearly that's not the case. Are we at all in danger of this not becoming a mainstream topic, or do you see us talking about diversity and inclusion in tech for a while? And
I mean, I see us talking about tech as long as tech continues to evolve. I don't think we can imagine a world today where tech isn't a direct part of our life. So for that fact alone, I think tech will constantly be a mainstream topic. For diversity in tech, I think as tech takes off and it becomes an integral part of our education system, our parenting styles at home, and how we really view the world, we have to start including everyone in this conversation. All the sections, all of the main sections. We have to take those microaggressions and really be able to put a light on them so that people understand that although, however small it might seem, or however insignificant that story or that headline might have been, it's impacted, if just one person, already too many people. And we have to continue pushing and having topics like this, events like this, organizations like Change Catalyst that are offering change and are being the catalyst to that change, and invoking the conversation within each and every one of us to continue that moving forward. For DiversityComm, I mean, it's in our name and it's in our practice. It's what we do. We want to be able to show those stories that include all of the different sections. And as we become more tech-based and digital mobile-based, I don't see this conversation going anywhere. And as long as we have people fighting the good fight, like the panelists up here, like you, Melinda, like your entire team, I just can't see it dying out. I can't.
I mean, I run into enough like entrepreneurs and executives that I think do buy into it as a strategic advantage that I don't see that it'll go away.
that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. It'd be awesome if it did, because that would mean that it wasn't a problem. But I imagine this being a problem for a while, unfortunately. Yeah, and I mean, then we see it. Hollywood's having their issues with
Yeah.
Harvey Weinstein. So like, these issues of diversity and inclusion and harassment are like super mainstream right now. So honestly, I think like within the tech industry, it might just get heightened.
What would be interesting is if it did start to leap to other industries, and we kind of have seen that with Hollywood, but we haven't seen it go beyond that.
Yeah.
Like if it went to like government, that would be pretty fascinating. I know that the state government here in California, like many women staffers in Sacramento, they like signed like a
Yeah,
letter.
yeah, Scott
So
Wayno
that-
was on,
yeah.
was earlier talking about that, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like, if that like happened in like DC, for example, that'd be pretty major. Or if we started to
Yeah.
see similar things like in the finance industry, or like I'm from Houston, so the energy industry, I doubt that'll ever happen. But like
Yeah,
that'd be
seriously.
fascinating if it really
Yeah.
started to spread around. But right now, it's kind of felt like Hollywood has been it's been on their shoulders for like the last month.
Well, having come from the film industry to the tech industry, I can say that the film and entertainment industry is far worse than the tech industry in terms of this. So they are just scratching the surface of something that is so normalized. I hope a lot more comes out. It's just the beginning.
Yeah.
It's yeah. So how is the journalism industry going? John Schwartz from the USA Today just got let go recently. He's a big advocate for diversity and inclusion work in tech, and there's this worry, I think, that the media industry isn't doing so well. How is it doing well? Is it doing well? How is it?
You mean like diversity within the media industry? Or
The media industry, is it?
Business-wise.
Yeah.
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 Are we gonna stick around?
Are you going to stick around? How is the industry actually doing?
I think like around May or so, someone like counted up how many people had been laid off already in journalism, and it was definitely like pretty close to 500 already. So it's been pretty rough. Like I know like companies, especially the ones that rely on advertising, it's been a little trickier, especially because Trump was a pretty good boost in 2016, honestly, but that hasn't really carried over. And I think in general, more and more folks are realizing that like advertising on its own is not super great. Although like I'd love to hear TechCrunch's perspective, but at Reuters at least, like I feel super like I don't know if comfortable or maybe comforted might be the better word, in the fact that we have like a diversified revenue source, and that there are people who pay for our software that gives them data on all the data on whatever company they're looking at, and then it's us as part of the business. We're not the whole thing, and then we also sell our stories to other outlets. So if advertising is doing poorly, that will eventually hit us, but it won't be so direct. And honestly, it's also helpful that my stories are then not motivated by page views, but rather by whatever I think is actually newsworthy, which I think if you're motivated by page views, that might incline you to act in a certain way. So, but I'd love to hear,
Yeah, I mean, TechCrunch, of course, has an events business, which I am under the impression contributes a lot to our bottom line. But yeah, I don't really have those conversations too much, but it seems as if we are in a comfortable position. And again, like I like that you're comforted. I am also comforted by what's happening with TechCrunch, and which is owned by Oath, which used to be AOL, which is owned by Verizon. So we're kind of within that like media group. And they always talk very positively of TechCrunch in like, the all hands meetings. And so hopefully that means I'll have a job for a little while.
How about you, Rita? Anything?
We've been in the media space for the last 25 years, and I don't see us going anywhere, especially as organizations like TechCrunch and Reuters, continue to push the conversation on, and we have partners like Change Catalyst that continue to motivate the masses to take action. For us, we get a lot of the, oh, wow, you still do print? Which is, yeah, we still do, because, as you guys can see, our magazines are displayed here. It's easy access for you guys to take advantage of, but we are going towards that digital age, right? As long as diversity and inclusion continues to be a topic, a forefront on people's minds, as long as we're still pushing hard to include all of the different sections and make sure that all stories are told, I don't think journalism is going anywhere. I think as long as people feel that they have a need to speak out and get their voices heard, I think journalism is going to be here to stay and to help those voices be heard. We're needed, and I think we're wanted, and I don't think we're going anywhere for a long time.
Yeah, I think as long as there's like a valuable piece of information that isn't easily accessible, then there is demand for journalism.
Yes.
I mean, it's the reason why I get like updates on every random fantasy football player I follow, because like if I'm clicking, then that's generating revenue and signaling that I'm demanding that content, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where do you see the story of diversity and inclusion in tech heading, and what stories aren't being told that could or should be told?
For us at Reuters, DACA is kind of top of mind at the moment because that one has a firm deadline, and if that isn't addressed, there will be certain but unclear ramifications for a population of almost 1 million folks. So that is still top of mind at Reuters. Yeah.
For us, with diversity and inclusion, it's kind of like our field of expertise. So for us, we're going to continue to propel that in a direction where we see continuous growth. And for us, like when you look at our 6 publications, although each one is centered around a certain demographic, African American, Hispanic, multicultural women, veterans, differently abled people, and minorities within STEM, we really do want to touch and tell stories that aren't being told. So for example, right now I think disability and differently abled people is one of the hottest topics out there. You've seen that just by some of the talks that we've had up on this stage, and some of these organizations that are coming out to make it really accessible for all people with different types of abilities to have access to fair and equal employment or business opportunities or educational programs. And I feel like we will continue to push that forward. And right now, the story for us is how do we, as an organization, continue to educate and inform our readership on what's happening in the D&I space, but still be able to include aspects of technology and stories that really highlight and point out what work still needs to be done.
Yeah, and just to kind of tack on to that, I mean, definitely just broadening the scope of coverage, kind of like you mentioned earlier, not just focusing on women or even women of color, people of color, but, people with disabilities, the veterans.
Age is the main.
Age for sure. The transgender community in tech, making sure that, like the policies are inclusive and, ensuring that you can change your name and that all of the paperwork will match up and it's not going to have to be a hassle, things like that.
Awesome. I want to open it up to a couple of questions. Y'all have questions? One here. There's like a mic coming for you.
Hi, this is Kelly from the Women's Bureau, and I just wanted to add a comment about sexual harassment. I mean, tech is not immune, or rather, tech is not the only industry that's experiencing this problem. Back in the 80s, finance was where it was a really problem with things called boom boom rooms, which seem to just be like reincarnated to rooms that here in Silicon Valley that we've heard stories about. You mentioned the letter that the legislators sent from California, but women legislators in Texas and Rhode Island have also written similar letters. We hear about it in Hollywood. For women that work in the trades and construction, it's the same. And it's basically a tool to drive women out of really good paying jobs. And I think it's just time that we figure out how to take away that tool from those in power. Thank you.
Other questions? One back here. Oh, there you go. Jared.
Hi, my name is Jared. I used to write for Change Catalyst, and Melinda was one of my editors. So I'm interested in the editorial process because I know a lot of it from the writer, the journalist perspective. You have an idea, you have an angle, approach, and maybe. Well, not maybe, definitely a a greater insight into the D&I angle of it. But if it has to go through a senior person who he or she may or may not agree or know to the level that you do, what's that process like? And I think it's a parallel process to D&I in any field where you have people that maybe aren't at the top that care about this stuff and know about this stuff trying to influence, and it has to go through often the people at the top, which is part of the challenge. So I just love to hear about the editorial challenges that you have in your organizations.
Well, at Reuters, I mean, we don't go into stories with angles. So I'd have to disagree with you on that first. We do like poking around and, research, information gathering, and then based on what we find, an idea will surface, and then we report that news. So at least at Reuters, the process is that the editors that are higher up, they are just interested in disseminating information. So if you can verify that what you have is real, then they won't let any personal biases that they have prevent it from being published. At least so far from what I've seen in my time there.
Yeah, and I guess with me, I can be selective in the editors I choose to work with. So there are 3 people I will I will work with on my team when it comes to matters of diversity and inclusion, because I know that they get it. That's not to say that I work with bad people or anything, but just some people get it more than others and can offer me productive feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to agree with everyone up here. I mean, for us, our CEO, our president, our publisher, our editors, they're all from that culture of diversity and inclusion being at the forefront of what we do. So for us, it's just a matter of being able to bring something of substance, being able to, like you said, fact check, make sure that the idea that you formulate or the narrative that you tell has an impact on the reader, right? Why are you telling this story, and how is someone reading it going to relate? So for us, we don't really have those higher ups, I should say, that would make that decision based on their personal bias or perspective. So we're really lucky in that aspect that we really get to tell authentic D&I stories that don't get shut down.
We have one more question back.
Hello. Hi, my name's Lily, and I'm coming here from UC Berkeley. So I was thinking about, you guys mentioned that it's not the role of news reporting to talk about what is already the norms, what is already happening that should be happening, that shouldn't be portrayed as, and I get that's not really the role of reporting. However, I do feel that working in tech, having friends who are white cis male, that from their perspective, all they see is reporting of when things go wrong, and then they tell me that they feel ostracized because they don't see any examples of when it's good. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, and maybe within the realms of reporting, or also if this shouldn't happen within the reporting space, should that be happening in, say, universities, schools, or us as individuals with access to the internet as publishing for individuals?
My answer on that would be that the first thought is that it'd be great if, in just education, there was a class that everyone had to take on journalism, because I imagine that your friends probably get all their news from Facebook, which isn't a good way of doing that, because I can guarantee you that everyone here has told a positive story on examples of what is being done right in the tech industry. Off the top of my head, I did a whole super long piece on 5 people at Google who were diverse and were directly impacting the bottom line. So that would be what I would have to say. You have to pay attention to where you get your news from, and that will help you get a better sense of the world. It can't just be from one place, and you can't just be letting the news come to you always, because then you have less of a handle on what you see. In terms of like shaping the story, though, I don't think it's just journalists. I think, yeah, like other places like, universities, I think the marketing departments of these companies, if they want to show role models, then that's kind of up to them. But it can't just be just whatever comes to you on your stream.
Yeah, that's
I honestly couldn't really hear the question, so I'm just going to go with what Sal said. So that was great, Sal.
yeah. Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think you're absolutely right. You really have to consider the source. For those who are within your network that don't necessarily know where to go for those positive stories or for that diversity and inclusion piece, I would refer you to diversitycom.net. Or find me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to set you up with a subscription to those magazines, but really do consider your source and where that news is coming from. A lot of what we see on a daily basis is constantly being filtered by the source and how they want us to see it and understand it. So we really have to be mindful when sourcing and researching, and yes, absolutely, I think universities should offer a prerequisite course on how to research, how to fact check, and how to really find these different sources when you're looking to see and educate yourself in your own personal realm.
And also, I think it'd be great because, you never know when someone's going to, report something incorrectly or who knows what, and all of a sudden you have, a whole pack of journalists on your front lawn asking you questions. That literally happened to us at the LA Times when Newsweek reported that this one poor older man in LA was the founder of Bitcoin, and the next thing he knows, he has like CNN parked outside. And if he had taken one class of journalism, that might have come in handy,
Yeah. So we're out of time. I wanted to ask each of you really quickly. We get so many tech companies coming to us saying, hey, can you introduce us to media? We have this story, or we're releasing our diversity numbers, and we need to talk to the press, and we definitely want your contact. What kind of stories are you looking for? Or are you looking for stories? Are you approachable by tech companies? How can they get in contact with you, and do you want them to contact you, I guess is the other question.
I definitely want people to contact me. My email is Megan, M-E-G-A-N, @techcrunch.com. I'm definitely always open to hearing about potential stories. In terms of what I'm specifically looking for, things that haven't really been, stories that haven't really been told before. It's actually, I know, it's kind of hard for me to say, like, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I'm not looking for. It kind of just depends on a combination of things. Like, does the founder have an interesting backstory? Like, do I think that this is a viable product? It really, so yeah, have a good product, that's number one. And yeah, have a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about it a little bit like, if like your rival had a product and you were matching it like 3 years late, like, don't pitch me on that, because that's not news. And if you're like barely starting, your diversity program and you're 3 years behind your rival, still not news. It's the same. Like, pitch me on something innovative. So that's what, when it comes to the more positive stories that I do write, it has to do with like how unique is this approach that you are taking to hiring more folks and retaining those folks as well. So. And then, yeah, I'm also, like, easily accessible. If you go to my Twitter, like, you should be able to find my, email, and always, open to tips. Yeah.
I would agree with my colleagues up here. We're always looking to share stories and have stories submitted to us, right? And especially from the voice that the story is about. So it can't be like, a white male writing about a female's perspective. It has to come from that perspective. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can email me at partnerships@diversitycom.net. That's with 2 M's. And we're always looking for submissions. We're always looking for content contributions. So if there are companies out there that are looking to tell their story, please have them contact us. We're always looking for that content and really being able to share those messages that impact our readers.
Awesome. Thank you, all three of you, for doing what you do and for being here.
Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you for having
I
us.
do have one thing.
Okay.
Okay, so we're tweeting live on Diversity in STEAM Magazine and Diversibility, and I just have to take a picture of this wonderful audience. So if I could get everybody to just put their hands up for a quick photo. Okay? All right, here we go. All right, y'all, big smile for me. 1, 2, and 3.